Welcome everyone who is logging on and joining for our RAD virtual awardee training. Thank you for joining. We will be getting started right around 1 p.m. So we're going to allow folks to keep logging in and just sit tight until we get started at 1. Welcome everyone. Thank you for logging in to the virtual training. We're going to sit tight another 30 seconds and allow more people to log in. Our numbers keep going up and we'll get started shortly. Welcome to the RAD virtual awardee training. Thank you for logging in. Our numbers are creeping up, so we'll keep the line open and we'll get started in a few minutes. Okay, looks like we've got a good number of you joining us for today's webinar. Thank you for logging in. Oh, got a whole new rush. The numbers keep going. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to get started with our introduction and we will welcome others, as you join in. So just want to kick off today with a welcome and a thank you. This has been our first ever RAD awardee virtual training hosted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Recapitalization. And today is day 5 of our 5 training. So this is our final session together. You have heard from several experts in the RAD field, and today we focus on the final stages of the RAD conversion process. My name is Grace Campion. I am with Enterprise Community Partners, and I am your host today, along with my colleague here, Michaela Miller. All participants are muted upon entry, and if you have any need for technical assistance, please send us a message in the chat box, and you can also email us on the RAD virtual training email that you see on your screen. Throughout this session, we also have a virtual advice booth that you can join at any point during the day and have kind of a more informal conversation with a RAD expert about specific questions you might have. We will give that information in our chat box here. Michaela will drop that in now, and you can click on that link and head over to the advice booth. They will also give you instructions about how to get back to the webinar, so don't worry. And just a few logistics here. For your best viewing experience, we recommend that you switch your view up in the right-hand corner to speaker view. This way the screen is focused on the presenter who's speaking, and you will also see the slide presentations. And we've reserved time in each of these presentations for questions. And I just want to share with you a few of the ways that we can receive your questions. First, our suggestion is that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and submit your question by typing it in. Some of our presenters can respond through the presentation, and just click the Q&A icon and submit your question. Pretty easy. Second, if you prefer, you can type your question into the chat box. That is your second option, and it will send it to our co-host for the day, Michaela Miller, and she'll be monitoring the chat box and will read the questions aloud when the presenter has time to take them. And lastly, if you would like to be unmuted to ask your question verbally, we are happy to accommodate that, and just send a message in the chat box to Michaela Miller, and she will unmute your line and cue you when it's time to ask your question. So all the materials for today's session are posted on the RAD resource desk and can be accessed there. You'll also find just some quick tips about Zoom troubleshooting and links to the advice booth. At the end of today's session, we'll be hosting our final coffee break. So for those housing authorities that have signed up in advance, thank you. And we will give you a little reminder at the end of today to jump over to the coffee break so you can chat with your HUD representative. And just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the RAD resource desk shortly. And immediately following the webinar, we're going to give you an invitation to fill out a quick survey, and please do that. We've received a lot of great feedback, so please continue that trend and fill that out today. And with that, I'm going to pass over the baton to Bev Redman, who is the Director of Closing and Post-Closing with the HUD Office of Recapitalization. She's going to say a few words of welcome to kick us off today. So Bev, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Bev Redman. I am Division Director for Closing and Post-Closing. I want to thank you very, very much for participating in this virtual conference over the last few days and for coming back today to close it out here. We have a lot of ground that has been covered. There are some more really important topics today, and I hope and I'm sure that you'll get a lot of insight into how to get to the successful closing. Aside from just my presentation, everything today is really focused on that. The successful closing and success post-closing for how you are moving from the elegant idea of moving the platform from public housing to the Section 8 platform and having an income stream and what that will do for you going forward and how you need to manage that. So with that, I want to say I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're all here. And I'll see you a little bit after 2. And for now, it's time for Leanne and Dan.
Great, thank you, Bev.
I'm going to stop my screen share, so Leanne and Dan, go ahead and put yours up there. All righty.
All right, there we go. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. I am Leanne Hausnecht, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dan Gordon. We're contractors with the Office of Recapitalization, and we are going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about CHAP amendments. So we named this a crash course because it is a lot of content and not a lot of time. We are going to do our best to pause kind of when we switch different topics to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. But we also want to let you know that everything we're covering here today does exist in writing in the form of a CHAP amendment guide that lives on the resource desk. So if it feels like a lot, just rest assured that this is all documented there as well. All right, so before we really dive in, we want to kind of understand more about you, our audience. So Grace is gonna open up a quick poll asking you what your current experience has been so far on CHAP amendments. If you've done some, if you've done none, if you have no idea what a CHAP amendment is, we wanna find out about you and your experience. So while you are filling that out, I'm going to go over what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to take a deeper dive into your RAD CHAP award. I know a lot of you are new awardees, so we're going to spend a few minutes just focusing on what's in your CHAP. We're going to go over how to request changes to your CHAP, which is what we call a CHAP amendment. We're going to dive deeply into all the different rent flexibilities that are out there that could potentially boost your RAD contract rents. We are going to talk about utility allowances, which are often forgotten but very important and can cause a lot of headaches if you don't get that right. We're going to do some tips and best practices, and then at the end, if there's time remaining, we will open it up for questions. But again, hopefully we have some time to pause and take your questions as we go. So hopefully you guys are all filling out the poll right now.
Yeah, we are at just about 60%. So I think I can go ahead and close the poll and let you guys see the results. Does that sound good, Leanne?
That sounds great. Yeah, I can't wait to see.
All right. There you
All
go.
right. Oh, good. Okay. All right. So 42% of you have done one or two. So you've kind of dipped your toe into the CHAP Amendment world. 7% of you have done so many, you lost count. We've got some super users out there. We've got some perfect CHAPs. 6% of you, you've got a perfect CHAP. You don't need to change it. We'll see if we change your mind after today's presentation. 21% of you had no idea you could change your CHAP. So that's wonderful. We're going to tell you all the ways you can today. And then 24% aren't sure. Hopefully by the end of the day, you'll at least know if you've done any of this yet or not. So that's great. We've got a real mixed bag. I think we'll kind of, we've got something for everything, something for everybody. All right, so let's dive in. Get to my next slide. All right, a closer look at your RAD CHAP award. So after you've applied to RAD, you get your RAD CHAP award, which I know you've all been through. That's why you're here. You're a new awardee. And Exhibit A of your CHAP is super important. So it contains the PIC development numbers of your units converting, the unit mix by bedroom type, what your contract rents are, what your utility allowances are. It tells you the fiscal year of your RAD contract rents. And a little later today, we're going to tell you why that matters, why it's important for you to know that. And it also memorializes what OCAFs have been added. So this is Exhibit A to your CHAP. I hope this all looks familiar to you. But if you just got a CHAP and you stopped reading after the first page, I encourage you to pick it back up and look at your Exhibit A. So you'll see here at the top, that first line is where it talks about the fiscal year of your RAD rents. And again, we'll dive into that a little bit later. So this is your CHAP Exhibit A, and this is what gets amended through the CHAP amendment process. Down here, underneath your rent grid on your exhibit, there's usually some special information that you want to pay attention to as well. It's kind of the footnote section. If you run up against any rent caps, it's going to be documented here. It also tells you what OCAFs have been applied, so that's helpful to know. Okay, so why is this important? Why are we spending this time talking about the CHAP and the CHAP amendment? So the bottom line is your CHAP matters because your CHAP equals your HAP, right? And I think we can all agree your HAP contract really matters because it's your subsidy to your project. So if your CHAP is wrong, your HAP is going to be wrong, and nobody wants that. So ensuring you pay attention to your unit mix, your rents, your utility allowances, make sure that the information that goes into your RAD conversion commitment, which starts off the closing process and ultimately into your HAP contract, is right. So the information in your CHAP Exhibit A goes into your RAD conversion commitment and goes into your HAP contract. So you really want to pay attention to it. It's very important. All right, so what is a CHAP amendment? So I stole this from IKEA. It's not original artwork, but it really rung true to me. So it is okay to change your mind. That's what CHAP amendments are all about. We know when you applied for RAD, you just kind of had a general idea that you wanted to convert, but you hadn't done your due diligence yet, right? You maybe didn't have a full sense of what capital needs your project had, financing sources. It was just kind of your best guess at the time. So the CHAP amendment process allows you to kind of go back and reconsider things that the composition of your CHAP,
Oh, looks like we might have an internet connectivity issue.
Yeah,
So,
I'm
all right.
not seeing. Go ahead, Dan.
All right, so I'll pick it up from here. So yeah, as Leanne was saying, it's perfectly okay to make a change to how your property is set up in your CHAP amendment. But just the one thing we wanna emphasize is to think of all the different variables very early in the process, so that you don't get to closing or are about to get your RCC and have issues with your unit mix or any of the other big aspects of your property. So I'm going to open up PowerPoint on my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, great. So what is a CHAP amendment? So it is a change to any of the information in your CHAP. And we'll go through the different types of information going forward. But so one thing we definitely want to highlight is the CHAP amendment guide, or the overview and contract rent flexibilities. It'll have all the information we're talking about, and a lot of information that we weren't able to get to, but it's your comprehensive go-to place for everything you would ever want to know about CHAP amendments, including what supporting documentation you might need or anything else. So this is up on the RAD resource desk in the document library, and I would definitely encourage you to take a long look at it. And as mentioned before, you definitely would like to see these requests well in advance of your concept call, just to make sure we can get everything all settled before we really want to move forward with your financing plan review. So this all, I'm sure, begs a very big question. How do I request a CHAP amendment? So we have a special spot for it on the RAD resource desk. So the way you would get there is first you have to log in, and then you want to click on the property that you want to request the CHAP amendment for. And then once you're there, as you see on the screen here, you go to the Action Items drop-down menu and click Request CHAP Amendment. So, and that will take you to this page right here. And this will give you a spot where you can put in your contact information and a reason for CHAP amendment, and any of the required documentation that you would need to submit for that particular request, or any other supporting documentation that you think would be helpful to make sure we understand exactly what you're asking. And definitely make sure to check the guide to make sure you have all the required documents, just so we don't have to come back to you and bug you after you've already submitted your request.
Hey, Dan, this is Grace. Just wanted to mention Leanne is back. So,
hi guys.
Back.
welcome back.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Leanne.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. All right. So the first different type of reason you would want to request a CHAP amendment is to change the structure of your CHAP. So by that we mean the number of units, the different PIC development numbers that go into your that are going into your transaction. And so there's a couple different things that one could do here. You can combine multiple CHAPs into a single CHAP, or you could do the opposite. You could split an existing CHAP into several. You can combine multiple PIC development numbers into one property, and we would call that a many to one. So all of this could come about just because you might have decided to apply for an entire AMP in your RAD application, but as you've started to look through things, you might realize that you actually need to have 3 different RAD transactions for that whole AMP. So if that situation comes up, you would come to us for one of these types of amendments. And here are just a couple of other examples that fall under this general category. So if you want to change the unit configuration or the unit mix, then you would want to come to us for a CHAP amendment. If you wanted to add more units from the same AMP to an existing CHAP, this may be done through a CHAP amendment. There's a chance we might need a new RAD application for those units, but that's something we'll have to double check once we get the request, and we'll look further into it. Then we have a couple of other examples here. We have the de minimis reduction and the RAD Section 18 blend. So if you're going to be removing units from your CHAP to do one of these 2 things, then you'll also need to come to us for a CHAP amendment. Another thing you might come to us for and request a CHAP amendment is if you are interested in a retroactive portfolio award. You may be in the market for a retroactive portfolio award if you were super enthusiastic at the beginning and applied for 10 or 15 different properties, but you may find that you're having trouble meeting all of the financing plan submission deadlines, but don't want to give up your place in line or the units that you've reserved. But fortunately, a retroactive portfolio award will help you out there. It allows you to actually move forward with your transactions further into the future while still maintaining your RAD reservation under the RAD cap. So you'll see a couple different rules and regulations we have on that here. You would need to keep 25% of your units or at least 4 properties active when you get one of these. But you'd still have until 2024 in order to keep those units. And then the portfolio award locks in the current RAD base rent. Just in case the rents in the future are going to go down, you could still keep the current ones. And you would still need to submit a RAD application for future CHAPs, but you would not, because you're reserving your place in line, you wouldn't need to be on the wait list if one were to form. Okay, so I think now we're going to take a pause for some questions.
Yeah, Michaela, do you want to open it up for some questions?
Yeah, sure. We have 2 questions so far. The first question is, if our CHAP specifies a specific bedroom count, can that be modified after it's submitted?
Yes, great question. So yes, you can reconfigure your bedroom configuration, change the numbers of 1s, 2s, 3s. That would be done through a CHAP amendment. You would also be subject to an FHEO upfront civil rights review, but yes, you can certainly do that.
Okay, thank you. And our next question, they say, we are going PBV and are submitting the financial plan stage. Our gross rents that is assigned to us is well below the FMR under Section 8. Can this be amended? And if yes, is it through CHAP?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question one more time?
They said, we are going PBV and are submitting the financial plan stage. Our gross rent that is assigned to us is well below the FMR under Section 8. Can this be amended? And if yes, is it through CHAP?
So your contract rents are your contract rents. So I think they're asking maybe can they go up to the PBV rent cap, which is 110% of FMR. So we are going to talk about some rent boosts that you could potentially do to enhance your contract rents. but you can't just up your rents to 110% of FMR, if that's the question.
Okay,
Good question.
thank you.
And if I misunderstood your question, you can definitely shoot us an email and we can dive deeper into that.
Okay, we have another question that just came up. They say, can unit mix be adjusted through a CHAP amendment?
Yeah.
Okay. And we have someone raising their hand. Let's see if they want to come on live and ask their question. M. Howard, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, it looks like you're still on mute.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can get back to them later. So this is all that we have so far. So you guys can get back to the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Leanne is having additional computer trouble, so I will share my screen again. Okay, great. So sort of to get to the point that one of the questions just asked. So we're going to the next section of the presentation talks about contract rent flexibilities, or different ways that you can adjust or increase the RAD rents in order to maintain the subsidy that you have during public housing. So here's the full list here. Switching contract rent base years, rent bundling, moving to work augmentation, opportunity zone rent boosts, RHF DDTF augmentation, special purpose units, excess utility surcharge, tenant paid utility savings, annual OCAF adjustments. So we'll go into all of these in detail. Okay, and this is, so your contract rent base year. So the rents in your RAD CHAP award are issued based on the rents in effect at CHAP issuance, which are in turn based on the current public housing appropriations. So once we get to a different, and this you'll see this on the next slide, but once you get from one set of RAD rents and we go into a period where we get to another, you're able to withdraw your current CHAP and switch to the most recent ones that are in effect. So we'll show that on the screen right here. So we are currently in the box that's highlighted in red for properties awarded new authority between January 1st, 2019 through the end of this year. And these are based on fiscal year 2018 public housing appropriations. So any CHAP you're getting now is going to be based on these RAD rents. If you've been with us a while and have an earlier CHAP that is in one of these other boxes that are now highlighted in red, what you can do is put in a request to change to the current RAD rents. You can look at the RAD rent spreadsheet that's posted on HUD.gov just to double check what your new rents would be. And if that's something that you would want to do, you can let us know. And if you're not sure about which RAD rent base year applies to you, you can look at the first sentence of the Exhibit A of your CHAP, and it'll explain which base year your contract rents are based off of. And again, the link for the current rents are shown in this link right here. Okay, so one option is rent bundling. So for any CHAP awardee with 2 or more CHAPs, a PHA can decide to rent bundle, which means to reallocate subsidy between those CHAPs in order to keep the same amount of subsidy. And we have a diagram right here. So that shows how this exactly would work. So we'd go, let's say you have 2 different amps and 2 different CHAPs, but one has $800 a month in rents from the RAD rent spreadsheet, and one has $600. So that might cause a problem if you're trying to set up your property and use plan for the different types of rehab that you want to do. So an option would be to do rent bundling, where you change each, and in this case, keeping the same subsidy would mean having $700 a month in rent for each amp would be the what you would want to do. So a couple of things to keep in mind if you decide to do this. Your donor, quote unquote, donor property, where the property that's giving subsidy to the other property must close before or at the same time as the receiving property, which is receiving the higher rents. And if you wanted to do this, you would complete the rent bundling worksheet that's on the RAD resource desk, just to show us that you are maintaining the same overall subsidy. And that's available on the resource desk document library. Okay, so moving to work augmentation. So if you are a moving to work agency, then you have the option to increase contract rents with your existing moving to work funds, which would come from your existing pool of voucher funds. And just one thing to keep in mind is that you would still need to do the applicable rent caps would still apply unless you're an agency that has had an adjustment in your MTW plan. And one other thing to keep in mind is that your subsidy layering review would apply for this additional subsidy. Okay, the Opportunity Zone Rent Boost. So this is a fairly new feature, just started in Rev 4 of the RAD notice. So we've gotten a lot of questions about it and a lot of interest. So if your conversion is going PBRA and you're doing new construction or substantial rehabilitation, and you're in a qualified opportunity zone, then you could be eligible for up to $100 per unit per month in an increase to your RAD rents. So you, in order to request this, you would need to submit some documentation to us to show just that it is indeed a new construction, substantial rehabilitation located in the opportunity zone, and also that the project wouldn't be viable without the rent boost. So we have a whole list of FAQs here that have more information on this. That's linked right here.
Hey, Dan, it looks like Leanne is back, so just want to give you the heads up.
I
Thank
hope
you,
I
everyone.
stay this time.
Yeah.
Okay. So another option is to use replacement housing factor funds or demolition, disposition, transition funding, or I will use their acronym, the acronyms RHF and DBTF funds. So a PHA can decide to trade in existing or future grants in order and take that pool of money to add to the RAD contract rents. And in the for future ones, HUD will provide you a forecast of that once once you decide that that's what you want to do, and you make the request on the RAD resource desk, and we'll get that process started. Just one other thing to keep in mind here. Most often PHAs make this switch for their own properties that are converting through RAD, but a PHA can make the choice to trade in future or existing funds to increase the rents for another PHA's RAD conversion through the provision for PHA partnerships, which allows PHAs to exchange resources for the benefit of their own RAD conversions. So as an example, PHA-A may choose to trade in its DDTF to increase PHA-B's RAD rents in exchange for unutilized land that PHA-B has under their declaration of trust that it sells to PHA-A below market value. So that's just something we'd like to highlight for everyone. And if you can choose to do rent bundling under a similar setup.
And Dan, I'm just going to step in real quick. We had somebody asked a question, what does RHF and DDTF stand for? So RHF is replacement housing factor, and DDTF is demolition, disposition, transition funding. A good question.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so now we're on to special purpose units. So under public housing, you can have a unit under ACC that is not a residential dwelling unit, that it's used for resident activities or resident services, but that's not the case under Section 8. Only dwelling units can receive subsidy. So that's why we've added this provision here, that if you have a unit in this category, the project can retain the subsidy for those units by adding the amount to the contract rents of the other units. And you would be adding the operating fund and capital fund portions of the RAD contract rents. Okay. Another example of trying to keep an option that you would have had under public housing that you can't have under Section 8 is what's called excess utility surcharge. So a PHA that's doing check metering and paying surcharges for excess utility usage by the residents. So if a PHA has paid that amount, they are able to augment the RAD contract rents by the amount that's in the year of that matches the RAD rents. So that's a way that you can, it's not something that maybe isn't as well known as we think it should be. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. If you're interested in this, there are a couple HUD forms that you need to submit, including the 52722. But more information on this will be in the guide. But yeah, if you send in those forms, then we can take care of this for you. Okay, this is an exciting one. So if your project has tenant paid utilities and the RAD scope of work has energy efficient improvements, you are allowed to increase your contract rents by 70% of the utility savings. And as it says here, you'll need to submit to us a third-party professional study that estimates both what the utility allowances will be after the rehabilitation and what compares them to what the current public housing utility allowances are to show the difference. And what that looks like is that your amended CHAP award and eventually your HAP contract will have two different rent schedules, a pre-rehab and a post-rehab version that includes the augmented contract rents. And the higher post-rehab rents will go into effect at construction completion, which is also when we will be looking for your RAD completion certification that you'll need to submit to us. And then OCAF adjustments. This is something that all PHAs can, with active CHAPs, can take advantage of. So each CHAP award is eligible for an annual OCAF adjustment every calendar year. And because this is something for everyone, we automatically apply them starting in January of any calendar year. You'll find that an adjustment has been made to your contract rents automatically. It's not something that you would need to request. But if you think that you should have gotten one and you haven't received it yet, definitely just shoot us a note through the resource desk and we'll double check this for you. Okay, I think now is when we're going to stop and take a few questions.
So Dan, we're a little tight on time, so we're going to run through utility allowances and then we'll pause for questions at the very end.
Okay, that's what we'll do. All right.
Can you control the slides for me?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you. All right, I'm back. I hope I don't disappear again. I'm sorry, you guys. So I'm gonna spend this final portion talking about utility allowances. Pay attention to them. I know everyone has a lot going on in their RAD conversions, and it seems like a small detail, but it can cause you a lot of headaches if you get them wrong. So let's talk about how utility allowances work in RAD. So we will start off with the rule. So whenever residents will continuously live at the property following conversion, your CHAP, your RCC, and your HAP must reflect the utility allowance currently in effect at the property prior to conversion. So it should have your current public housing utility allowances that are in place at the site. So if people will be living there, you're going to close with your public housing utility allowances. Those utility allowances may have changed. When you applied for RAD, it may have been a year or two ago, and you've gotten an updated utility allowance schedule. So make sure you look at your CHAP, take a look at those utility allowances, make sure that that's what they reflect. Okay, so, but what fun is a rule if it can't be broken? So exceptions to the rule. So if no residents will be living at the project following conversion, which is frequently occurs if you're doing like a heavy rehab or new construction, so let's say you're temporarily relocating folks to other sites, then the project and your CHAP can close with the future post-rehab utility allowance that you would have to calculate using notice, we cite it here, 2015-08, it's a housing notice, but both PBRA and PBV follow the housing notice guideline. So again, no residents living there, you can amend your CHAP to include your future utility allowance. And we also have a note down here that for PBV, you can set up, you can either use your housing choice voucher schedule, or you can set up a site-specific utility allowance. So you have that option for PBV. All right, so some more on utility allowances. Something to keep in mind if your conversion involves changing utility responsibilities. So what do we mean by that? So we mean changing the party that's paying the utility. So if you have 100% owner paid utilities right now, but as part of the RAD conversion, you're going to be switching over to tenant paid utilities, that is a change in utility responsibilities. And it matters for you all because your RAD contract rents are built on expenses based on your existing utility configuration. So if you're an owner and you're paying all the utilities, your RAD contract rents filtered in that extra expense, so they're higher. And if you're switching those to your tenants, if you're not going to pay that expense anymore and your tenants are, your contract rents will go down and your tenants will get a utility allowance. So keep that in mind as you think about your RAD scope of work, and if you are contemplating making changes to utilities, how that impacts your contract rents. And the reverse is true as well. If tenants are paying all utilities and the owner is going to take that on, it would be the reverse. Your contract rents would go up, your tenant utility allowance would go down. So again, if this change is being made at closing, which is pretty rare, you can amend your CHAP to reflect that. Otherwise, you're going to do that post-closing under existing multifamily for PBRA or PBV rules. All right, so we've got an example up here on the next slide of what this looks like. And again, the key part here is that residents will be relocated during the entire rehab. So there are no residents living on site. You are going to go from owner paid to tenant paid utilities. So your original CHAP when you applied showed $500 contract rent, no utility allowance, owner paying all utilities. You're going to reconfigure that and have tenants pay utilities. So your contract rent goes down to $525 and you get you add a utility allowance, $75. So your gross rent stays the same, but again, you're no longer paying utilities, you're passing that expense to your tenants, rents go down, utility allowance goes up. All right. And then tips, again, just because utility allowances come up quite frequently. So one thing to keep in mind is the RAD application doesn't allow you to input different utility allowances for the same bedroom type. So if you have a scattered site project, maybe that has townhouses and a mix of maybe some low-rise buildings and a bunch of one bedrooms that have different utility allowances, you can't input that level of detail in your RAD application. So your CHAP isn't going to show that level of detail. But you can amend your CHAP, and you should amend your CHAP. Please amend your CHAP to show that level of detail. So you can see on the screen here, we've got this project has 3 different one-bedroom types with 3 different utility allowances. So request a CHAP amendment, and this will make sure this information gets into your HAP contract. Very important. All right, so some tips and best practices. So review your CHAP unit mix utility allowance information early and often. We see a lot of folks that get to closing before they really dive into this, and that causes a lot of headaches and slowdowns for everybody. So take a look at it. And again, don't wait. Look at your CHAP amendment. Another plug for the CHAP amendment guide. Read through it and see all the different options that might apply to your deal, and start thinking about your CHAP amendments. Do it early, and definitely well in advance of your concept call. Submit a complete amendment request. Again, the handy dandy CHAP amendment overview guide tells you everything you need to submit for each type of amendment request. So submitting a complete amendment request will allow us to process it quickly. Don't forget about rent caps. So you can augment your contract rents, but the RAD rent caps continue to apply. Again, another plug for the guide, consult the guide. And then finally, ask for help. We know there are a lot of unique situations out there, and it can be a lot to navigate. So you can request TA through the resource desk, or you can email us here at resourcedesk@radresource.net, and we can help walk you through it. All right. So thank you guys. I think we still have a few minutes for questions. So we will open it.
Yes.
Okay, we have our first question says, can you talk about how the utility allowance works with contract rent coming to the PHA and payments to owners?
Yes, so we briefly touched on this, depending on if you're changing utility responsibilities with your conversion or not. So yes, if the owner is pushing the utility responsibility to the tenant, your contract rents are going to go down and your tenants are going to get a utility allowance. And the same is true in reverse. We do know that utility allowances and configurations is very unique to each project. So if you have a specific scenario, definitely email us and we can dive deeper into it.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. Our next question says, what does AMP stand for?
Oh, great question. So it's AMP, I think it's Asset Management, the public housing term, but it's basically the same as your PIC number. So in public housing, it's how you've grouped your units within your public housing system. So you can see here on the screen, we have, if you look behind the A+, there's an existing PIC development number. We kind of say PIC development number or AMP interchangeably.
Asset management projects.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Next question, they asked if you can show the link where the rents are listed again. Maybe you could drop it in the chat if you have that link.
Yeah, Dan, do you want to go back to that slide?
Sure thing.
Yeah, it's on the HUD.gov/RAD. But there we go. HUD.gov/rad/library/notices.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, can you rent bundle with two properties that do not meet the aggregation requirements mentioned in previous sessions? Example, more than 1 mile apart or separated by a physical barrier, such as a highway.
Yeah, sure. Yes, for rent bundling, you don't need to worry about how the projects relate to each other, and except when it comes to timing. So you'd have to think about the donor closing before the receiver, but as far as their location to each other, that does not impact the rent bundling.
Okay, next question. How does rent bundling work with RAD/Section 18 blend, in which the project would have RAD designated rents and 25% non-RAD PBV rents?
Great question. So I don't know, Dan, if you'd be able to pull up the rent bundling slide, but basically what it allows you to do, so the non-RAD PBV rents are usually 110% at FMR. So in most cases they're higher than the RAD rents. So it would work similar to this structure, except you would add kind of another bundle for those non-RAD PBV rents, if that makes sense. So pretend instead of there being two separate amps, it's like the same project, but you're bundling your RAD rents with your higher non-RAD PBV rents. So your total monthly income still has to equal the same, but you can borrow from your regular PBV rents to increase your RAD rents. So your PBV rents would go down, your RAD rents would go up.
Okay. Next question says, can you clarify what existing rent caps are?
Yeah, so for PBRA, your rent cap is 120% of FMR. For PBV, it's 110% at FMR or your reasonable rents. MTW agencies have some flexibility there, but those are the general caps.
Okay, next question. What is the typical calculation of the DDTF rent boost? How much additional rent is generated typically?
Another good question. So it really depends. So if you're interested in doing that or just exploring it, email us. And what we do is we then email the Office of Capital Improvements, and they give us a forecast of your future anticipated amounts. So it does really vary by project. I mean, I think usually we see in the millions. We then take that obviously and divide it by over 20 years. But it does vary by PHA, so there isn't really I don't have a great answer for average. Dan, I don't know if you've got a better answer.
No, yeah, it depends. You know, it sometimes depends how big your property is, and then you might have a big number, but it's divided by, 400 units, so that per unit increase isn't very much.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If the special purpose units for resident services is a part of CHAP, as part of the CHAP award, does the PHA need to maintain the special purpose unit designation in order to maintain the CHAP rent status?
I'll let Dan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So if you want to have the unit be a special purpose unit and get the rent boost from that, then you would also be removing that unit from the CHAP, because it won't be a dwelling unit that would be in the HAP contract going forward. So yeah, you wouldn't keep it in the CHAP if that was what you wanted to do.
Okay, 3 more questions here. Hopefully we can get through them. Next question says, when are the 2020 RAD modified rents expected to be published? And should we be assuming a 2020 OCAF increase on the 2019 RAD contract rents until they are published?
So yeah, so I'm going to take the last question first. So yes, if you have your fiscal 18 year rents, which is the current rent year, you will be getting a 2020 OCAF. I don't know when HUD will be publishing the 2020 year rents, but we can follow up on that. they would not be subject to the 2020 OCAF. The first OCAF they would get would be 2021. At
Okay.
least that's typically how we've done it. So I'm assuming that's how we do it.
I believe January 1st, 2021 is when the 2020 rents would, at least what the plan is for those to become available.
Yeah, that's when they come effect. I just don't know when they'll be published.
Okay. Next question. If we are changing from PHA paid water to tenant paid water, is it best to do before conversion or after conversion?
So if you are, great question. So this can get complicated. If you're doing it as part of your RAD scope of work, which is what I would recommend and what most people do, I guess I would include it, if you can, do it before conversion. But again, if tenants are going to be living at the project after closing and that conversion over to tenant paid isn't going to happen in conjunction with closing, your CHAP has to show the current configuration. So it really comes down to timing of when you're making the utility responsibility switch, and then if residents are living on the site. So that might be a good one to email us about, and we can talk through the timing and if you should amend your CHAP or not.
Okay, and we have one more time for one more question before our break. This question says, how does SMFMR factor into the RAD rents?
Can you repeat the question? Is this about the small
Yes.
area FMRs?
Small area FMRs.
Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, so if you're in a region that uses a small area FNRs, that's what we would use for calculating your rent cap.
Okay. All right.
Hey, I'm gonna jump in here. I think, yeah, thank you, Michaela. We're gonna stop for a quick break, and thank you for everyone who have put your questions into the Q&A. That really helps us manage your questions. So a big thank you to Leanne and Dan. We are going to break for a 10-minute stretch break. So please join us back here at 2:05, and we will jump into a presentation by Bev about closing your transaction. So we'll see you all back then, and thanks again, Dan and Leanne.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, Bev. I can see and hear you, so I think you're good. If you wanna, do you wanna put your slide presentation up? Just get that ready.
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna stop my screen share and go ahead and throw yours up there.
Let's see. Oops. Not the right thing. Where is my screen share now?
So I'm seeing your screen. It's just not in presentation mode.
Okay, I am seeing something else.
You're good.
Let's see. How's that? No, also.
Perfect. Yeah, that displays well for us. So good, good.
Okay, great.
All right, let's hang tight.
Ah, what did I do?
There you go. You're back.
You're seeing, okay, wait. Oop. I'm seeing the thing where it says next slide and no notes on my, but you're seeing the right thing, right?
Correct. Yeah. Which is, it's because when we were doing the setup at 12, we switched your screen view so that it would do it this way.
Okay. Now it's trying to.
I see that it's
Captions. Are you seeing closed?
captions. Yeah.
What do I do here?
Don't worry about it. Unless it bugs you, I think it's okay. I don't have much.
Oh no, it bugs me. I don't.
Oh, okay.
You know what I hit?
Mm-hmm.
Is
I
that,
don't know what.
now it's
There
off.
you go. Yep, you're good. Nice.
Okay. See if we can get through this.
We will. All righty. Okay, folks, welcome back. Thank you again for joining us today for our final of the 5-day virtual training sessions. For the remainder of today, we will be focusing on the closing your transaction, closing your RAD transaction. And first we have a presentation from Bev. So I'm gonna toss it over to her and we'll get started with the rest of this afternoon. Bev, take it away.
Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, everybody. I really am excited to be able to spend this time with you because I really want to say it's important to think about what you're going to do at closing. I know that you've spent 4 days listening to all the different things that you have to take care of before you get to even to get your commitment to the RAD conversion commitment, the RCC. And I want to just add on that closing should not be an afterthought. It would be really to your benefit to have a focus on how you're going to handle your transaction at the end game of the conversion. So what we're going to talk about today is think about closing before you get there, even before your RCC is issued. And we're going to go through a bunch of different topics that I think will benefit you to think about early in the game. I want you to know the parties who are going to be involved in the closing process, understand what the process is going to be that you have to get through to close. And then closing actually isn't the end. There are also some post-closing responsibilities that we're going to cover. So first thing that I've got here for start early is ownership entity. So there are ownership and control requirements in the RAD notice. You may not believe this, but we have had deals where we get to like 2 weeks before the closing deadline and all of a sudden there's a glitch. And what's the glitch? The glitch is that they haven't really determined what the ownership entity is going to be, or the partnership agreement is not complete, or there are two different stakeholders who think they agreed to two different things about how the ownership's going to work. So again, maybe wouldn't ever occur to you that this could be a problem in closing, but I want to say don't leave it. Make sure if there are issues around ownership, if there are discussions, make sure that you drive them to conclusion before you get to the end. We need to know who the parties are, or at my line at the time was, if you don't know who the parties are, then we can't close. So that didn't happen very often, but I have seen, it didn't go to that extreme very often, but I've certainly seen problems arise during closing related to this. Now, another point I want to make to you is that the information about ownership is information that you enter on the RAD resource desk. So it's important for it to be accurate and correct. So if you're a PHA and you've got a mixed finance property that you've created a different entity to be the ownership entity for that property, that needs to be the current owner that's listed when in the RAD resource desk, that entity. You're not the owner if there's this other entity. You are the PHA and you'll be entered as the PHA, but again, we need to have the parties correct. And if they're not, it can then create, it'll create delays, because generally speaking, what happens is something comes up in a legal document that indicates that there's a problem here and that things aren't really matching up. And so we have to figure it out then. So it's far better if you can look at it in the beginning and make sure that you get those entities correct and correctly identified. I would also ask that if you're the housing authority of the city of Wonderful Town, then please put into the resource desk the housing authority of the city of Wonderful Town when it gets to like your signature block. Because if you put in Wonderful Town Housing Authority, your lawyer is going to tell you that that's not accurate. And again, that's just going to create an additional burden. So instead of doing it once, you're going to be doing it twice. So my advice is to try to do all these things once and make them accurate. The last thing I want to say about ownership entity is that for PBRA and for PBV that has any PBVs with FHA insurance, you are going to have to go to multifamily field office and submit your applications, submit the required, I guess it's called the APPS system. I don't even know what that stands for. It used to be called 2530, and I think everyone still refers to it that way. The 2530 submissions for ownership, the review of the owners, that is used in RAD conversion. It has to be finished in RAD conversion, but it's not a RAD process. It's still a multifamily field office process. So again, this is something that you might even make your submission and it's a year later and maybe it fell through the cracks, maybe there was something missing and somebody didn't realize it and so it was never acted upon. But if you haven't heard back, it's not the Office of Recapitalization that's going to be able to help you. It's got to be you talking to the field office. The other item listed on the slide is not really related to ownership entity, but it is related to this idea that some processes need to occur in the multifamily field office, even though you also must finish it to close your RAD deal, or at least be on your way for the Affordable Fair Housing Marketing Plan, which is the AFHMP. That also has a normal process where you submit to the field office and then it does have to go another place within HUD. But again, Office of Recap can't help you finish that process. You need to start it with the field office and follow up if you don't hear anything. Okay, so let's go on to our next topic for what else should you think about when you're starting early, before you get your RCC, well before. This slide is really about what's going to happen after your closing. So do you have your management agent? Do you have the staff you're going to need? Are you identifying the systems that you need? Are you getting those ready? Do you know what your reporting requirements are going to be and how that's going to be incorporated into your operations? That's the first part of the slide. Then we go to the HAP contracts. The number of HAP contracts. I know that there have been discussions during this conference about, you might have a few different buildings that you're dealing with together, and they may be next door to each other, but they might be 10 miles apart. And depending on whether you're PBRA or PBV, whichever you choose, there are slightly different approaches to what can be in one HAP contract. So the PBV rules is a rule. There are some very specific rules in PBV that I used to actually know and be able to rattle off. But right now, I would just say what I know is that they have to be contiguous. The properties have to be contiguous. So I don't think there's much debate or discussion about how many HAPs, but you just have to recognize. Now, on PBRA, it's a question of being a manageable and marketable entity. So those decisions need to be made. Again, you don't want to be making those when you're 12 hours away from your financing deadline. So you have to think about that beforehand. Now, I do want to just add that any scattered sites property or an AMP that's got scattered sites in it, those have slightly different ways of looking at how many HAPs. So I don't want to go into it now because I think it's more specific to your situations, but it isn't exactly the same issue. And then the last thing, there's a word that got cut off here, review the waitlist policies and admission preferences. Again, you might have to make some changes to your, to the way that you deal with things, and you may have to be able to handle that, and you may have to get permission for that and put that into your annual plan. So now I want to talk about assembling your closing team. Again, our topic is starting early. So I think it's important for you to think about, how is this going to work? How is the closing process going to work? Who's going to be our point person? How are we going to communicate with HUD? How are we going to make sure that we are connected with the people that we need to be, the additional stakeholders, the partners? Who's going to be our contact? Who's going to make sure that they're carrying the ball? Then also some other things you want to think about. Do you want an external consultant? Is there some way that could be helpful to you? Do you want to obtain counsel with RAD experience? I'd suggest that maybe you do, but of course that's your decision. And then review title, avoid surprises. So title is one of those things that, you can be going along very well for 40 years, never knowing that there was some problem on the title. So it won't affect you until you go to do a real estate transaction, which guess what this actually is, because you're releasing your declaration of trust and you're placing a RAD use agreement on this property. So the property has to be well defined and it has to be okay from the title perspective. So I know we've moved up in our process when we've asked people to get a title report, but getting a title report and reviewing it and taking care of any problems are, it's other steps in the process. Just getting the report is not going to save you. It's using the report that will save you. And again, all these cautionary tales are things that I've seen that have created a lot of difficulties, to get to closing that could have been handled earlier in parallel processing with other things that were going on, and could have saved everybody a lot of time and a lot of brain cells. Connected to this, who's doing what, how are we actually going to do this? Who are our parties who are going to be involved in closing? You'll find on the RAD resource desk that there's a tremendous amount of information about closing, and you can read that at any time. It's on the public-facing part of the resource desk. If you go into documents and you go to closing, you can find there the checklists that list everything that we think you will need to provide for the closing reviews that are done. You can find things that describe, you can find the descriptions of how to fill in your HAP contracts. You can find all sorts of guidance about what's going to happen during closing. So I suggest that you take some time and take a look at those documents, because again, if you're prepared for what you're going to have to do, I think you'll be ahead of the game. So I have on here financing as the title. I'm not sure that's exactly the right title, but let me tell you what I want you to think about here. The RAD requirements include that the RAD use agreement has to be in first position. Now, that can be a difficult ask for certain lenders who haven't dealt with HUD before, or haven't seen RAD before, or have whatever reasons that they don't want to allow the use agreement to be in first position. So it's a dialogue that you ought to have with any financing entity, also with investors, not just with lenders. So I think I want you to think about, making sure that the RAD requirements are well understood by the parties who are going to fund your conversion, or the need for some of the sources in your conversion. The next thing I want to talk about is the funding in the year that you close. Or the funny thing about RAD is that we are converting, well, I guess it's not funny, but we are converting you from the public housing appropriation to the Section 8 appropriation. That's the fundamental, as I said before, elegant idea here. The way it's set up is that the year that you close, so the calendar year that you close, the funding still comes from the appropriated money for that year. That's what will come through the PHA, through lock system. That's what you have. That's what it is. It doesn't matter for that first year exactly what your HAP says. You are not going to be paid by Section 8 funds according to the HAP. So that is a little bit of a tough concept, I think, and especially when the ownership of the property is changing during the conversion. So in other words, there's a different owner afterwards than there was to begin with. HUD is not going to interfere in how that first year money is used, except to the extent that we have created a tool to make it very clear to everybody what amount of money is available, and for everyone to sign off on what is going to go to the new owner. So that's really critical to understand. And again, I think it's a hard concept. There's a cognitive dissonance there, that you've signed this HAP contract and it has something on it, but that's not the first way that you get money. You don't get on that system until you're in the Section 8 appropriation, which starts the next year. For existing mixed finance conversions, that is also a place where this idea of the lender needing to have the use agreement in first position can create a lot of problems and long, protracted negotiations. So again, sometimes a mixed finance conversion, the property's in good shape, you already have an LLC or an LP, and everything seems like it should go very smoothly. And then you get hung up at the lender part. Again, I don't know that I can give you any hints or clues for how to make that go better, but I will just say to address it early, so if it becomes a problem, you have time to work it through. And the last thing I want to say about financing is for you to know and understand your deadlines and timeline requirements so that you can tell them to us and we can help meet them. It's very difficult sometimes for us to really understand what a deadline means, because there are a lot of different deadlines. There are deadlines from, let's say, a lender financing that you might be able to extend the commitment, but it might cost you money. So there's there are deadlines that will blow everything up. There are deadlines that will cost money. There are deadlines that can be met with something other than an actual full closing. So I would say again, before you get to the closing process, the better you understand your deadlines, the better we can all work together to meet them. Residents start early. I know there was a lot of discussion about this yesterday about what you need to do with your residents. And I just want to remind you all that you establish it. I think communication is the key here in terms of your connection with the residents, and in terms of your record keeping. It's the key, I think, is the right to return. You need to know who's occupying the units, and you need to be able to track them. If they are going for relocation, if they're not, we need to really be sure that it's very clear to you what tenants have this right to return to the property. And I'm not doing any polls. I hope you don't miss them too much, but I would like to ask you right now just to think for yourself of everything that's been covered in this conference. What do you think will have the most important impact to ensure the future of this property? And I want to suggest to you that the answer is the money. And you could see here, start early, the money. You know, there's such a long path to getting to our RAD closing. There's so many things you have to do. There's so many details that people have to understand, be aware of, and deal with, that I think sometimes the part that you're going to end up with forever and ever in the HAP contract, sometimes that takes a back seat somehow. It doesn't become anybody's focus. Maybe I've seen times where it seems like nobody was really the point person in charge of making sure that the CHAP is correct. So again, you know, now you've had a little brief discussion about the CHAP and how you can look at it and what kinds of things you can do and what kind of changes you can make. And I'm asking you, I am begging you to look at your CHAP award carefully in caps, right? Check your unit mixes and rents. Check your utility allowances. Understand that you may need to update those utility allowances because you want to do that as early as possible so nothing's held up at the last minute. And you really don't want to come back to us afterwards to say, uh-oh, we closed on the wrong utility allowance. I mean, just save yourself heartburn, right? And only do, again, I like to say, let's just do things once if you can. And not to say that you can't change a CHAP, you can, you should think about it. If you had a certain unit mix and rents, and there's some reason why something's changing, you decided to use an MTW flexibility, or you know something else changed in your plan, then come and tell us. And by the way, you can always write an email to RAD Resource Desk and it will get to the right place. So I'm begging you, before you get to closing, and certainly after you get the RCC, check the CHAP. Make sure it's correct, okay? And if it's not, then ask to amend it. And that way we can get to closing with the right rents for you, okay? The other thing about the money is that this is a statutory ability in this program to move money from a PIH account to support this Section 8 property, but only if it is in the sources of the sources and uses at closing. So I'm sure that there are a lot of rules around what you can and can't do, and I don't know those rules. Thing that I know, I mean, in terms of what money you can put in or use, I don't know the rules of that. But what I do know is if it's not on the sources and uses, you cannot use it to support this Section 8 property, okay? So be sure you pay attention to that and use this opportunity as you need to. Okay, well, this slide is not meant for you to read the captions really, or I'm not going to quiz you on them, but it's the idea here is that there are a lot of players in a RAD closing. And there's so many stakeholders in this transaction that we have created this position of RAD closing coordinator so that we can keep track of what's happening. So the RAD closing coordinator, once the RCC is issued, you go from the care and tending of the transaction manager to the RAD closing coordinator. We have different divisions. The transaction manager is in the transaction division, the closing coordinator is in the closing, post-closing division. And the closing coordinator is intended to be your main point of contact for your process of closing up to and immediately after closing. So the closing coordinator has a bunch of different tasks. Sometimes it's hard to really enumerate everything we do because sometimes I think we act in the scenes. We keep people together. We connect what's happening over here to what's happening somewhere else and make sure that everything is going smoothly. And if there are hurdles or policy questions, that we address them in a timely manner. But there are some things we do. Every deal, we look at various documents. We ensure that the special conditions are cleared. We establish logistics with you for the closing documents because there are still paper closing documents and people still need to realize that you've got to build in some time for those to move around. And that's the closing coordinator will lead you through that discussion. We also notify PIH when the RAD closing occurs so that the PIC removal can be facilitated. And we coordinate on the initial year funding with headquarters. But again, if you see the bottom of the slide, the most important role to me of the closing coordinator is to keep all those different stakeholders moving towards closing. I mean, you've got lenders, lenders council, owners, owners council, new owner, new owners council, consultants, development consultants. You can have a myriad of actors. And really, the closing coordinator is the one who's going to help keep everybody moving forward towards closing. There are other HUD actors, and I did want to go over that a little bit. So aside from the closing coordinator, who's now your primary contact, and the transaction manager who you've been working with for some amount of months prior, now you've also there's going to be a HUD field counsel who's assigned to review the transaction. They have a bunch of different things they're looking at. You know, one thing is documents, but there's documents. There could be legal issues related to something that you are proposing, legal issues for HUD. And they also determine whether the RAD notice requirements are met when we're talking about ownership and control and some other things that they are responsible to look at. They are our partners. We do parallel processing. We in Office of RECAP are in coordination with them. And, you know, sometimes a problem is a legal problem. Sometimes a problem is a program issue. And sometimes it can cut across both, and everybody needs to be involved to get to a solution. And the HUD Field Council, you know, has to be done and satisfied with all the things that they are required to review and approve before we can go to closing. Other people at HUD, again, the transaction manager, PIH field office, they are involved because everybody's a PHA, right, coming in. That's where this program is converting the PHA money. So PIH field office is involved. If you need help, that often in the beginning, they can help you to understand what you want to do, where you want to get to, and how you want to undertake RAD and get to closing. The multifamily field office, we talked about a little before. If you are choosing PBRA or if you are doing an FHA closing with a PBV CHAP contract, you are going to have an account executive who's going to be involved with you forever afterwards. So there are in PBR, in these situations, they are in the closing period going to be looking at your documents that they need to have to continue do the ongoing management. And those will be required to be approved by the field office. The closing coordinator is going to be a liaison to make sure that we get those documents in and get them to multifamily so that they can be reviewed. And then we have FHEO that's more involved earlier in the process, but so occasionally there's something that comes up at the end where we need to bring them in. Hopefully, if everything's been done properly up to this point and done in a way that all parties agree to, hopefully it really won't need to involve FHEO during the closing process. So now we've talked about who the parties are. We've talked about what you should do early to have a successful closing. Talked about who the parties are and how the closing coordinator is really is the person who's going to know where everything is so that we can help you get to closing on time. What is the process, right? So you have, as I said, on the RAD resource desk, you can look at the closing checklist. It shows you the documents you're going to need. It shows you what's going to be reviewed. And I've had times when people were like, well, I'll send you the package and then we'll be ready to close, the week later. Well, that's a misunderstanding about how this works, because what happens is you send the package and then HUD reviews the package. So generally speaking, there will be comments from the closing coordinator on probably some program issues, or you may be telling the closing coordinator that the sources and uses aren't quite done yet, or that the HAP, you're still discussing how many HAPs, or you need help discussing how many HAPs or something. Although the HAPs, right now, the HAP number's in the RCC, but sometimes things change. Or you originally thought you wanted to do a delayed conversion, and then you heard Will Levy talking and you said, no, I'm not going to do a delayed conversion. I want to change my RCC. So all those things that need to get done, their program side, are going to flow through the closing coordinator. Then there's all the things on the legal side. And again, you can take a look at the checklist. It is rather lengthy, and that will tell you what they're going to be reviewing. So best practice that I would like to encourage is that you really be ready for closing when you get an RCC. I mean, you're in closing now. So hopefully you're ready for closing, and within a couple of weeks of the RCC issuance, you and your lawyers can send in all the packages for review. And by sending it in right now, what that means is you upload it onto the resource desk for the program review, and you follow the directions of whatever field counsel has been assigned, so that you give them their documents in whatever form they want, and that will help them with their review. Let's see, did I cover everything? Okay, so as I said, we hope best practice is you're really ready when the RCC comes out, you send us your package. We do understand that's not always possible, so we try to say, can get us a package within 2 months. The RCC is good for 90 days. We do entertain extensions, but honestly, our goal is that everything would be done within 90 days and you've closed, and we can go on to the next people who need our help. So if you're having, serious problems actually being ready to close after you have the RCC, that's definitely something to discuss with your closing coordinator so that we understand where you are and what to expect. We do have a sort of mechanism to kind of put on hold. We call it delayed submission. We've not used that in the last few months because of COVID-19 and trying to be flexible. But we are, I think the point is that if you know that you are having problems and things are going to take you a while, let us know so that we're not wondering what happened. Thank you so much in advance. Getting to the finish line. I want to talk about deadlines again, because it's important to communicate your deadlines and understand your deadlines. it's always a mystery to me why if I say to a closing coordinator, well, have they told you when they want to close? And it's, well, no, you know, or I mean, that doesn't seem right to me. Somebody's got to know. So I do think it's true. I don't think my closers are saying anything that isn't true, but I think that it's not, if the person who's in contact with us trying to help you get to closing doesn't understand what those closing parameters are, then we can't work towards them, right? We can't help. So please, please know your deadlines. Don't tell us 3 days before that you found out something is going to happen in 3 days and you have to get it done. That's just, it's an I don't even know what word to say. It's not going to help, right? Let us help, okay? The RAD closing coordinator completes the final program review. Again, there's some parallel processing going on. The closing coordinator has to say that the program review is complete. The HUD council has to say that the legal review is complete. PIH has to complete the things that they review and work on. And again, make sure when you calendar it out, leave time for notarized signatures and moving paper documents. That's always an issue. It's always an issue because we're all so used to pushing a button and something goes. But it's even more an issue right now because we're not all in the HUD building. And we have a several stage process where it used to be basically one stage because we have people meeting to make a final approval. And then we have a signatory who has to connect with a notary when both parties can be in the same place. And then we have to get those documents scanned, and then they have to get taken to a UPS. And where that all used to be in one building, that's not the case anymore. So again, I would encourage you, when you're thinking about your deadlines, move them up a week or two. Aim for something where you have time for documents to get to where they need to be. And year-end closing requirements, the only times we've really had a workload that for us could create the need to prioritize what we work on is towards the end of the year, and October, November, December. It's not every year, but we recognize that that's our heaviest period of closings. We know that from experience, and we have created a way that we prioritize, if needed, what we will work on. We've sent it out generally in March or April. I believe we sent out our memo, it was either the last week of March or maybe the first week of April this year. So we try to be very transparent. So take a look at those if you think that you're going to need to close in year end. Part of it is timelines of being in advance with your financing plan, so, and your RCC. So just a word to the wise, take a look at that, but also remember you can close anytime during the year. And then not to forget that there is life after the closing date. So you've met, your lawyers have everybody's signatures, the escrow instructions have all been followed. You can break escrow and record. And immediately following recording, what we need emailed to the closing coordinator is the fully executed HAP contract, the recorded and the executed and recorded DOT and executed and recorded RAD use agreement. There may be some other specific items in your deal, but that's basically what we need. And we don't need paper. And if in this time period, when we know there are different things going on with recorders' offices, we have some ways that we approach things where we accept the fully executed documents and get recorded later, but you should discuss that on a case-by-case basis because it's not an open season to do anything regarding closing. There's still some rules and parameters. Then after those three things are emailed to us, the rest of the documents that we are asking for as the final docket need to be uploaded onto the RAD resource desk. And again, what is the final docket? It's anything that you provided to HUD for review should be loaded in its final fully executed form. So it's not only documents that HUD signs, it's other documents that affect this transaction. And then completion certifications. So we launched these a year or so, maybe 2 ago. I don't remember now exactly. But what this is sort of, this is the final look. So if you have new construction or rehab, this is after your construction is completed. There are certain things you need to give us, including a third-party certification that the scope of work is complete. You go into the transaction log and do final sources and uses. And we do ask for information about the residents to ensure that the right of return is upheld. And what I want to say about that is it's not about relocation. It's not. If you say to me, I don't need to fill this in because I didn't do any relocation, that's not the point. The point is, who are the residents when you started and who are the residents when you finished? And did everybody maintain their right to return? It's really a separate issue from relocation. So just again, to help you look at it, if you read it and you're thinking relocation, it won't make sense to you. But if you read it and you realize that what we're trying to ensure is that the right to return is upheld, then I think it will make more sense. If there's no scope of work in the RCC, which does happen, then we still are asking for completion certification, and that is a little bit different, but we are looking for IDRR deposit. Again, we're looking to make sure that the right of return is upheld, nothing to do with relocation again. And then you'll see that there are a couple of other things when you go on there. The completion certification is a transaction page you can find on the resource desk. And then let's say you finished, you've got everything, you did a great job, you loaded up all the documents, you finished your completion cert, but then you realized that the HAP did have a problem with utility allowances, or the unit mix somehow, you didn't listen well enough today, or your colleague forgot to tell you about it, and you do have a problem, which I really, really am sorry to hear. But any kind of problem you have, or you realize there's an easement on the property, or there's something going on post-closing, we kind of look at it in a few different ways. One is, were there errors at the closing? If there are errors at the closing. The other is the scope of work complete? If the scope of work's not complete, use the RAD resource desk page for post-closing processing and tell us what is the problem and what you need us to help for. There's a way to do it there. And then we will be the ones who will guide you through the solution. If the scope of work's complete and your completion certification has also been completed and accepted, then you should go to your PBRA account exec or go to PIH to discuss it if you have a PBV with no FHA. So that's what you do with those post-closing problems. There is a point of contact within HUD. We're trying to get this into a guidance that we can publish. But for right now, the best thing to know is you can always write an email to the RAD resource desk and they'll tell you the right way to handle it. Or if you know that your scope of work wasn't complete or your certification's not complete, then you can come back through the post-closing processing page. And that's it. Good luck. You've got this. I think you're going to do great. And I really look forward to all of you having successful closings.
Awesome. Thank you, Bev. Right on time here. Just wanted to open it up. We've gotten a few questions. So if you've got, we've got you scheduled for another 5 minutes here. Michaela, go ahead and read out some of the questions that we've received.
Okay, our first question here, it says, can you give a brief example of a non-financial closing?
So sometimes let's say there's a property that's pretty new, or it was refurbished. It had a very big refurbishment or rehabilitation, whatever you want to call it, 4 years ago. So when the physical needs assessment is done, it really needs only some minor, maybe it needs some signs changed or some lighting changed. And the PHA can fund that out of their own reserves. So then it's a pretty straightforward conversion where maybe there's no lender, there's no investor, it's just PHA money involved.
Okay, thank you. Our next question says, how long does it typically take for HUD to review closing package?
You know, it doesn't really take that long. It's all about how much other work I think there is. But I think if you could give us 10 days, that would be typical. And again, I think the more communication, the better. If you have a deadline you're trying to work to and we can help get there and it's reasonable, then that's what we're going to try to do. Again, if you're the only thing on somebody's desk, it's a big difference than if it's November and there are, 15 packages to review.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, they say, thank you for your very real and relatable process and workload that you experience on your end and your good advice. They want to know if you accept DocuSign signed documents.
We are not I don't know if we are not using DocuSign. We have the PBRA HAP. We are signing electronically on the PDF. But no, we're not doing DocuSign.
Okay, thank you. And we have time for one more question here. It says, what documentation is required to prove the right to return was upheld, and is there a form?
Really, we have a very simple table that you fill in that kind of starts with how many units were occupied and how many people left voluntarily and how many people were evicted, or how many units had evictions. And it sort of walks you through. I'm not going to ask you, you don't have to submit to us however you're documenting it. You have to submit to us the numbers. But I think it's important for you to be able to document it if you're asked. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. That looks like all the time we have for questions. So Grace can go ahead and take us away.
Well, here you go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bev, so much for your input and your great overview of everything. We are now, awesome. We are now going to switch over to our final session here today, the final session of our 5 days. So I'm going to ask Will Levy to do a screen share of his presentation, and Yvette and Nick will also be joining us on the screen, and they'll be chatting with him about operationalizing the conversion, sort of life after closing. And as he's going through this, please, drop your questions into the Q&A. We've had a lot of great questions today, so keep it up. All right, Will, take it away when you're ready.
Mute and start video. All right, there I am. Hello, everyone. Congratulations, we're at our last session. We're at the end, or is this just the new beginning? So Bev's just talked about, walked us nicely through closing, which includes, of course, the monitoring that we do to make sure any rehab or construction is completed on time, or if there are any changes that need to come up along the way. But remember, at the same time, this property is now on the Section 8 platform, so it's operating under Section 8 rules. So for this last session, we want to spend some time, not too long, but just some time, talking about how to make sure that your transition into the Section 8 program is as smooth as possible. In the first day of the conference, Jaime walked us through some of the differences between PBV and PBRA, some of the reasons PHAs choose one form of Section 8 or another. The purpose of this presentation is to highlight some of the main points you and your team should become familiar with as you're getting ready to enter into the Section 8 platform. So I am very happy to be joined by two colleagues who know much more about this than I do. Yvette Viviani is in Multifamily's Office of Asset Management and Portfolio Oversight and is really well versed in all things Section 8 and spent a lot of time with PHA's new owners as they've come onto the Section 8 platform. We've got Nick Bilka, who's with the Office of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and who spends a ton of his time thinking about the PBV program, and particularly around properties that are coming into the PBV program as a result of RAD. Let me see, can folks see this? Do folks see the slideshow in full screen, or do you see just the partial screen right now?
Yeah, if you can put it into the full screen mode, then it'll.
Okay.
Over to.
So
You're almost there. There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome,
Okay.
awesome.
So we're going to start off. We'll walk through today are the key governing documents in the PBRA and PBV programs, the preparations that PHA should be making as they are preparing for conversion, particularly the staff that will be focused on the Section 8 side. We'll talk about some of the unique funding items in RAD, talk about ongoing oversight and requirements, and then a few key RAD considerations. So let's jump in. I'm going to jump around asking Yvette and Nick some questions that we'll be talking off these slides, and then also just from their general expertise. So Yvette, would you mind starting just talking folks through some of the key governing documents that that owners and management agents should be aware of as they're entering into a PBRA contract?
Sure, Will. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Yvette Viviani with Multifamily, as well as stated. You may be talking to me months from now with regards to onboarding, which we certainly welcome. I'm one of many multifamily staff that assist with onboarding. So please know that you're in good hands, okay? We're really tasked here to help you get set up and to receive your subsidy payments in a timely manner. With the PBRA program, we know that when you're converting over in your initial year, you're going to continue to receive funding from the PIH side for the remainder of that year. And then come January 1 of the following year, after your conversion, is when you actually receive funds from the Multifamily Housing Program Office. And we can't instill upon you enough that there are things that need to be done well before that January 1 date. So, I'm going to go through some things here that will help you. And certainly we'll be tagging you from time to time after conversion to kind of help you along in these efforts. So let's start with the HAP contract noted here. That's one of the most critical documents that you're going to have in our program. That is your contract with HUD to receive your subsidy payments on your property. These contracts for RAD are modeled very similar to all of our Section 8 contracts. They follow the 880 regs, I refer to them as, the 24 CFR 880s. If anybody's into regulations like I am. So they're very, very similar to our other Section 8 contracts. And I just want to call your attention to a number of elements in the contracts that are kind of critical that get you up and running. And things that we really want you to make sure are correct prior to closing. That enables you that you can't get paid unless they are. So again, that's a very strong point where I spend a lot of time working with the RAD properties. First of all, is your RAD contract effective date. So make sure that that's correctly listed on the HAP contract. You have other documents you've dealt with prior to closing, the RCC, the CHAP, and all of those documents well needed for the program and for conversion. But when you get to closing, the HAP contract, when you bring that over, that's really what we're going to go by to oversee, your management of the property and, making payments to the property. So you need to ensure that that effective date is correct, that your contract rents that are in your exhibits are correct, and your utility allowances are correct. And those are in part 1 of your HAP contract. Again, very, very important to make sure those are correct. Another piece important to us after closing and having to do with subsidy billing that are in the HAP contract, and this is under part 2, are your rehab assistance payments. And these are the payments that you'll receive when you're rehabbing units where tenants are not occupying the units. We have the program set up whereby you will receive a sum of money for each of those units until the rehab is completed. So there's a rehab assistance payment listed in that section in part 2, as well as a time period for which you're eligible to receive those. Okay, so again, these are a few critical elements to the document that we do, really need to have in place, correct at the closing date. These documents are needed by the staff that you have that are going to be onboarding your property, because they're going to need to have access to these rents, the effective dates, the rehab assistance payments. All too often when I have properties come over and we may be 6 months, 8 months after closing, and we're trying to get the data into our track systems, and just kind of, I don't know, out of nowhere, I say, are you eligible for rehab assistance payments? And, the staff say, I don't know, what are those? So, again, we need to make sure that these documents are passed down to the staff that you have charged with getting your property set up in our payment system, i.e. tracks, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So that these payments that you're eligible for, that you can receive those, okay? Always, they're going to have the HAP contract. That's a critical document, and there's some other documents that they need to be aware of also. So I'm going to step forward now to, it's our HUD Handbook 4350.3. It's our occupancy requirements for subsidized multifamily housing program. And that encompasses all of our Section 8 properties that we have. And it also has practice in there and some of the other smaller programs as well. But that is a rather voluminous guide, okay? Don't be intimidated by it. It's got a lot of good information in it. And what it does is it takes our 880 regs and all of our guidance on how to administer the occupancy requirements for our Section 8 properties and puts them out into layman terms, okay? As an example, requirements for your lease, requirements for your TSP. It gives examples. It tells you what you can include, what you should not include, things of that nature. It's got sections on preferences, how to apply for those. It's got wait list, really just about everything you need for occupancy requirements for your properties, okay? It's a very important handbook. I do want to note, I myself took personal training from an outside vendor, okay, that specifically, we have a number of trainers in the industry, Section 8 industry, if you were to Google these, a number of entities out there that really their sole purpose is to train folks on all things HUD. And I myself went to a whole multitude of different trainings, property maintenance and books and the whole gambit. But there is occupancy training as well, and I think that might be something that you would be interested in looking into. So just suggesting, it's something that you can Google. Like I said, there are trainers out there. They all have different levels of training, different pricing and so forth. But it's a very, very good resource, particularly for new owners that may not be that well acquainted with multifamily, okay? Another governing document, of course, is the RAD notice. I think that kind of speaks for itself. There are a lot of provisions in there that we cross-reference over in some of our materials. But it does set out some that we don't go into a great deal of depth in explaining. So that's a resource that we encourage you to provide your staff that are dealing with managing the properties. Now, finally, I think what we have on the note here, the slide, is our RAD PBR Quick Reference Guide. And this guide was born right after we launched RAD. We felt that there was a need to have a crosswalk of sorts between administering, properties under PIH over to the multifamily housing program office. We have a different platform here, and this is a very good aid. Okay, it's short. It brings up a lot of the topics that you're required to know. It gives a lot of references in there. It gives links in there for places to see, and different systems guides and so forth. But all in all, it's a very helpful document. It answers a lot of how-tos. We've got rent phase-ins. I mean, there are things in here. I would definitely say that your staff on the front lines dealing with particularly certifying tenants really should have this quick reference guide, a copy of it. It is available on the RAD resource desk. In addition, we are updating it. It should be out shortly as we do update this from time to time. Okay. But all of these documents are needed for the staff that you have that are going to be a little closer, to us than the closing folks are. The folks that are going to be administering the program, the site folks, or whomever you have dealing with your day-to-day operations.
And
Okay. So that's.
Just before we leave this, I forgot to ask, when a property converts over to PBRA, who's going to be the property owner and management agent's main point of contact?
Okay, well, yes, thank you. The main point of contact for the properties is always going to be your local HUD office. And I'm going to throw two titles out there because it could vary from where you're located, okay? It would either be an account executive, okay, which you should receive the name of prior to closing, or it will be what they call a resolution specialist. So it's going to be an account executive or a resolution specialist. And these are folks at our regional offices that actually will take your property once you close. It's assigned to them and they bring it into their personal portfolio. And they will be working with you to bring your property on board and also throughout, the years to come, working with your property as far as the rent adjustments any reserve issues, things that occur that you need to discuss regarding financing, just anything. That's your HUD contact. Okay, so HUD is assigning a specific one point of contact to you. There are others you'll get to know because they will have different reasons to reach out to you for different things. But your primary contact will be your account executive or your resolution specialist.
Great. Thanks, Yvette. Yvette, I'm going to move on now to switch over to Nick to talk about the key governing documents that folks that are converting over to project-based vouchers really ought to be familiar with. Nick?
Yeah, thank you, Will. When you talk about the key governing documents, we don't have quite as extensive guidance available to the level that I think PBRA does. And part of the reason is project-based voucher program, while it's been around for, I think, about 25 years now, it's really evolved and grown a lot in the last 5. 10 years ago, it was probably 50,000 units. 5 years ago, it was a little over 100, and now it's at somewhere in the 230s, and they keep growing with more RAD conversions coming on with some of the changes to the PPV program that have been brought about by HOTMA that allow for more project-based vouchering, and obviously all the repositioning that's gone on with RAD. I think we've gone from 22,000 RAD units a few years ago. I don't know what it's currently at, Will, something like 70,000, a fair guess?
Total PPV conversions, that's about right, 70,000. Yep.
Yeah, so that's a huge amount of growth in just a number of years, and it's just going to keep getting bigger. Some of the key governing documents, if you're working with the PPV program, obviously outside the ones listed here, the PPV program, with only minor exceptions, is also, governed by the rules of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, especially when it relates to individual tenant type issues. So CFR 982 is obviously pertinent there. For the PPV program, 24 CFR 983 covers a lot of the regulations that govern the PPV program. The HAP contract is as with PPRA, is the governing document that that governs the contract between the PHA and the owner of the property. And of course, in order to have a project-based voucher program, that has to be part of your administrative plan. So those various regulations that guide that, 24 CFR, excuse me, 888.113H, 903.12, a number of them, those are things that you're going to want to look at for what you got to do to amend your administrative and annual plans and 5-year plans, so that you're keeping up to date with what you're doing with the PPV or the RAD conversion. The HAP contract, the tenancy addendum, the leases you have with your tenants, PIH notice 2721, and that specifically relates to some of the changes that have been brought about by HOTMA, which expanded a lot of the ability of PHAs to do project-based vouchering. It doesn't necessarily impact, some of these things don't impact the RAD conversions as much because they're exempt from some of the limits that we have for the program. But it's still worth knowing, especially if you're going to do a RAD conversion, and this maybe piques your interest in doing some other project-based vouchering in the future. And we are going to be coming out with another rule related to PPV, I think a proposed rule sometime in the near future. It's currently at OMB. The RAD PPV quick reference guide that's mentioned here provides brief references for major program requirements. But in addition to that, and it's not out yet, but it's something that our office and the HCV office is working on, is coming up. Just as you have an HCV guidebook, we used to have a full HCV guidebook. We've spent the last couple of years trying to update that, and we go chapter by chapter, and you can find that on our website. but we don't have a PPV guidebook, but we're trying to change that. Hopefully sometime in the next year or two, we're going to roll out a PPV guidebook that governs all the requirements for the program and provides sort of an easy reference for you to do this without necessarily looking at a bunch of regulations and more commonly used language. So those are some resources that we're hoping to get out there. We're hoping to do training for our field offices so they're better understanding the requirements of the PPV program, and they can assist PHAs that work with, they can assist PHAs that are trying to convert to RAD. Will?
Great, thank you, Nick. All right, moving on. So Yvette, back to you. When prior to converting, if you wouldn't mind walking through some of the important things that an owner must have done related to getting getting into the Section 8 platform, onto the PBRA platform. Could you walk us through some of those things, whether those are on this screen or other things that you want to highlight?
Sure, these are fine. I will note here that I know that some of these items were spoken earlier in this presentation. So I'll just go over them lightly, you know, because they are pre-closing, and I think it was Bev that went through the 2530 process. You know, the 2530 process is a multifamily requirement. We do require that the owners go through this, complete the form. It goes to the transaction manager, and this is all prior to closing. And that's to ensure that our multifamily owners have the necessary financial and experience needed to administer our subsidy properties. So there's a 2530 process that's in place on that. Also, a requirement is the affirmative fair house marketing plan, which I'm sure I'm fairly certain you have a similar situation in PIH. I can't imagine not having that. But the multifamily housing plan, we do require, it becomes an attachment to your HAP contract. That's completed. It's the HUD form 935.2A. And, you know, on this one, you're going to put your marketing requirements and things of that nature. Again, I think Bev touched on that. Also, the tenant selection plan. Okay, so this is a document that really spells out the descriptions of the eligibility requirements that are needed for tenants or prospective tenants to apply to your property. This is where you're going to have those requirements, the income limits, things of that nature. Your TSP is also going to set out any preferences that you currently have in place at the property. So that will need to be in your TSP, and that's like including elderly restrictions, any preferences, you know, in the admission of tenants. Later down the line, should you later do an owner adopted preference, which you can read about in the 4350.3, which I spoke of earlier. Anytime that you updates, you know, add a preference, remove a preference, change marketing, what have you, you need to update the affirmative fair house marketing plan, okay? Touching on the model lease, multifamily has a standard model lease for the Section 8 program. And you'll need to have those in place for each of the tenants. That's HUD form 90105-A, okay? There are instructions on there. It does go into great detail with the instructions. With the model lease, of course, that's going to be effective for those tenants in the program. The effective date of the contract. This helps us track those individuals with rights to return. You know, the model lease has a multitude of addendums, okay? One of them being the house rules. We have a VAWA addendum. The 50059, which is the tenant certification. similar to the 50058 on the PIH side, okay, the 50059 or quote 59, that's an addendum, as well as some other ones, okay? So just want to put that out there. That's a document you'll need to have ready and get that in place with the tenants. And lastly, but really one of the more critical pieces is as early as possible, you need to start looking for a software vendor for those folks that currently don't have any business with multifamily properties or any experience. You need to have a software that is what we call TRACS compliant. And there's a number of vendors out there that sell the software. We do, make that a requirement because that's the vehicle for which we pay you, transmitting through TRACS. It's similar to the system you were using on the PIH side, which is PIC, which you'll need to do your end of participation dates when you convert. But on the multifamily side, the really critical piece here is to get your TRACS software lined up prior to conversion. Once you convert, you need to get within 90 days all your tenant data established in this system and be transmitting vouchers. And this is something that's been proven to be a bit of a challenge. So it's something we wanted to strongly really bring out here with this forum and others that we speak to, that even though you may be getting paid by the PHA in that year of conversion, you cannot wait until the last minute to get your TRACS data set up because it takes several months to do that. And it is a regulatory requirement that you are up in 90 days. So certainly that's something that we really want you to focus on, prior to conversion, and really hit the ground running once you do convert, is to start your business and getting into TRACS. Now, you can do it yourself, okay? The other side is that you can hire a management company to do it, or you can hire just a vendor who specializes only in transmitting TRACS data. So it's not a full-blown management agent per se. It's someone that just deals with properties TRACS data. A lot of alternatives out there, and they're all designed to get you up and get you paid as soon as possible, because we do need to avoid waiting to the last minute. It bottlenecks in our systems, because our systems all of a sudden start seeing dollars come from all of the RAD properties when it was used to seeing zeros in the year of conversion. Okay. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with that because hopefully, we can engage afterwards. Your account executive will to bring you up to speed on this. We do have limited resources. Should you get into trouble, I need assistance with transmitting. You go through your account executive and they'll certainly help you with that. Okay.
Thanks, Yvette. So we just have a few minutes left, so we'll try to go quickly through the remaining slides. I apologize that we're to both panelists and folks watching, but let's get through this. Nick, could you walk through some of the key things that PHA needs to do on the PBV side before it, as it's preparing for conversion?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, their administrative plan has to indicate that they're having a project-based voucher program and set out the criteria for site selection, for selecting proposals, things of that nature. They also have to, sorry, just a second. They have to identify an independent entity if the property is PHA owned to perform things like HQS rent adjustments under the OCAF. And that can be, for instance, you think of an independent entity, it has to be something that's not connected to the PHA. So you could have a neighboring PHA, a local government, a nonprofit entity, a law firm that works in affordable housing. There's a number of different folks that could serve as your independent entity. And I would advise you to look at that PIH notice 2017-21 that has some of the criteria for what constitutes a PHA-owned property. Additionally, you have to be prepared to conduct the HQS inspections. That is, unless work is required as part of the conversion, and then the HQS inspection can be done when the conversion takes place. Those cover sort of the basic things you have to set up, and then you have to be prepared. Once the project comes online, you have to start reporting that information into VMS on those units that you have RAD PPV for and regular PPV.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to take try to quickly run through some of the unique funding issues. I think Yvette and Nick have both made reference to this, but for folks' awareness that in the year a property converts, it continues to get funded through the Public Housing Operating and Capital Fund. It does not immediately get funded from the Section 8 accounts with Section 8 HAP. We have initial year funding tool that PHAs can use to estimate and prepare for those amounts. And we've got instructions on the RAD resource desk around how that works. Some of the key points of that is, even though the funding is not coming from Section 8, it's still a Section 8 property. And so the tenant certifications should still be coming in according to standard PBRA and PBB requirements. So 50059s under PBRA, or the 50058s under the project-based voucher program. On the funding side, the owner is still submitting those 5.9s into tracks and preparing its voucher for subsidy, but then zeroing out that amount. And if it does that, that really positions the owner very well to secure subsidy once we get to January 1 of the next year, and the subsidy for the property comes from HAP. Then on the voucher side, and just as Nick said, the PHA is not reporting into VMS during this period because the money's not coming from HAP, nor is the PHA earning administrative fees. Then we get to the first full year after conversion, when the contracts are funded from Section 8 funds. And on the PBRA side, the owner is submitting the vouchering for HAP into tracks and getting payment through tracks. And so making sure that's queued up well before then, you've got the benefit of this transition period to make sure it's done. On the project-based voucher side, the PHA receives a new increment of voucher funds from HUD that are used to pay the contract costs. And at that point, they start to report into VMS and earn admin fees. Sorry, I ran through that a little quickly, but again, short on time. All right, lastly, Yvette, if you got 1 minute to talk about some of the really key kind of oversight requirements under PBRA that folks should be aware of, what life will be like, and the standard kind of submissions and reviews that an owner will be subject to. Here's your minute.
Let me just run through them real quick. We have what's called annual management occupancy reviews. And that's where, we have contractors or HUD staff that will come in and go through your tenant files and all of your TSBs and house rules and what have you to make sure they're compliant. We've got the REAC inspections, which you're very familiar with. We've got submission of financial statements through our multifamily FAST system. And the reserves for replacement requirements, particularly if you're financing, you're well versed on that. And I believe you have replacement requirements in PIH as well. Now your annual rent adjustments are critical. Those are things that you'll work with your HUD AE on, and you need to start those 120 days prior to your contract anniversary date. There's some forms you'll need to fill out and send to your account executive or / resolution specialist. And those need to be done with a utility analysis. And that has to be done at least we try to 4 months, 120 days prior to your contract anniversary date, so that those can be implemented on time.
Thanks, Yvette. So Nick, I'll turn to you. Some of the key things, again, that a PHA should be prepared for, or the owner should be prepared for, in terms of the owner's oversight and requirements as they're in the post-conversion PBV world.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I think our relationship as far as HUD goes with the PPV program is a little different than HUD's relationship with the PBRA program. In this, the PHA is going to act more as the contract administrator, and HUD provides some oversight of the PHA, but not necessarily in the same extensive manner that HUD might have the contract administrators, the PBRA program. But I will say, we have looked at, if you're a PHA, we've done some pilot monitoring, and we looked at a basic list of things that you would look at, you'd want to have if you were a PHA, or if you're a RAD owner, to make sure that your PHA is doing, which is, you have the current operating budget that has been approved by the board. You have some documentation of that. You have the final RCC, you have bank statements that document the monthly deposits to replacement reserves. You have work description, documentation, work items for things that you've done that drawn from that reserve. Documentation of the independent entity, you have copies of the HQS reports, the rent calculation documentation for RAD PPV projects showing rent reasonableness and OCAF adjustments, and documentation showing that the PHA is supporting the resident organization, that $25 per unit per year. Those are some of the really basic requirements that if you're doing a self-check as a PHA, that you might want to look at in terms of oversight, because this program's grown a lot, and HUD's oversight of it could grow in the future. That remains to be determined. So you want to make sure that you're documenting and keeping copies of all these things so that you can justify it to whether it's the program office or if OIG happens to look at a project later. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. All right, so just the last quick thing, folks should remember there is also some key resident rights that continue after conversion that are a little bit different on the Section 8 side. So one is, again, right of return and being able to track those former public housing residents to make sure so you're justified and not rescreening them. Implementing the rent phase-in, which allows residents to pay less than 30% of their income in rent, or at least a period as they phase into that standard 30% level. Ongoing resident participation funding that Nick was talking about, resident termination and grievance procedures, and choice mobility requirements. These are just, a lot of these were covered in Thais' session earlier this week on resident rights, but key things to remember that are going to be ongoing after conversion. Okay, so I think we have unfortunately run out of time and don't have time for questions, but for anyone who submitted questions or submits questions after this, we'll certainly get them answered. Apologize for that. I want to break now and just thank Yvette and Nick for their participation here. I'm actually now going to turn back as we close this conference turn back to Tom Davis for some closing remarks.
There we go. Great. Well, thank you, Will. And thank you all for joining us. I think the conference is, we've tried to give you a lot of good information. Thank you for participating. Thank you for putting up with the new format, which I think had a relative minimum of hiccups. Many thanks to our colleagues at Enterprise who have done a lot of the behind the scenes work to make it all work as smoothly as it did. I hope that you feel that you've gotten some overview of some of the key steps in the process, the capital needs assessment, the environmental review, resident rights, how to submit the financing plan, the closing process, and some of the onboarding things that happen after closing. Most recently, the stuff that Yvette and Nick were just talking about. Certainly understand that we've spent a fair amount of time in the guts of the program and sort of how it works and the mechanics. I hope that that focus on the details has not hidden the big picture that is what RAD offers in terms of the ability to get onto a much more predictable funding stream that is not as influenced by the ups and downs of the annual appropriations process. The Section 8 platform is a long-standing platform and well understood and easy to work with for financial sources that you may want to tap into for support to your projects. Certainly the asset management and ongoing oversight has very long-standing practices on the PBRA side. On the PBV side, it's a growing program, so that may evolve a little bit. But the big picture, we hope that you have gotten a chance to get a sense of that big picture and the opportunities that exist for you to figure out how to get your portfolios on a really stable, sustainable foundation for the long term. We also hope over the last couple of days you've learned some of the tools and tricks, things like transfer of assistance or blending of RAD and standard tenant protection vouchers that get project-based under the Section 18 rules, some ways to work with the rent setting, whether that's supplementing it with replacement housing factor funds or bundling rents or getting the opportunity zone boost, a whole variety of tools. And we hope that this gives you a little bit of a flavor of those tools. And also we hope that you got some examples and stories of what some other folks have done with their transactions, and particularly appreciate the insights from the PHAs that have participated on the panels and some of the non-HUD staff, all of the non-HUD staff who've been involved in the panels to give some non-HUD perspective on the RAD program. We know that you can only sort of scratch the surface in a conference like this, and we hope that you also got a sense of some of the resources that are available, how to navigate the resource desk and tap into information that's on the resource desk, but also the fact that we have technical assistance that's available. We have a variety of HUD staff who are part of the team that are part of our job is to help you navigate this program so that you can understand where your options are. And we really welcome you to brainstorm with us about what you're trying to achieve so that we can help you figure out the best ways to get to that end goal. Overall, we recognize that these RAD conversions are transactions. They are real estate transactions as you are trying to think about the best foundation for your real estate portfolio. As transactions, everyone is going to be a little bit different. They all need to respond to your organization's goals, your financial needs, your property needs, your partnerships in your community, your residents, a whole bunch of very local considerations. And so we understand that these are not one-size-fits-all transactions, and so that back and forth with you about how these work, what you might need in terms of your transaction, what support we can provide you as you're putting your transaction together. That's all part of how we approach these RAD conversions. We certainly try to be responsive and welcome the feedback when we can do more. But we also want you to be creative about how you are managing and the futures of your portfolio, of your real estate portfolio and your affordable housing delivery in your community. And we've introduced a variety of innovations, ways that different organizations can partner together, even partnerships between housing authorities and that kind of thing, which is new to the program as of several months ago. But we welcome you to bring your ideas for how this program could work better for you. It's a demonstration. We have certain base guide rails, things like long-term preservation of the property, resident rights, things along those lines. But we are very open to new ideas. Sometimes they may require waivers, but waivers are how a demonstration evolves, and often we've seen those waivers incorporated into the next revision of the RAD notice. So we welcome that brainstorming about new ideas and new structures and new strategies to stretch the dollar, the limited dollars that we're all working with, as far as possible in support of the affordable housing mission in your community. So in sum, I hope that the last several days have been helpful. Please let us know how we can connect you with more ideas and more information and folks who can help you along this path. I think that the end result is a very good one with lots of flexibilities for you. And we really look forward to working with you and are so pleased that you're engaged and interested in the RAD program and in figuring out how to advance your mission most impactfully in your community. So thanks again for coming. Thanks again for joining us. And I know Grace has some final logistical thoughts. And with her, that will be the end of our program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. I just want to remind everyone that a survey will pop up on the side of your screen, and we would love for your feedback. You guys have been great these past 4 days, giving us great feedback, so please fill that out. And for those of you with scheduled coffee breaks, follow the link that's in the chat. We will be in touch with you all by email as the recordings from these sessions get uploaded to the RAD resource desk. And as always, the PowerPoint presentations that you viewed here today and over the past 4 days are all available on the RAD resource desk as well. And again, thank you so much for hanging in here with us for these 5 days, and we really appreciate it. And have a good rest of the day. Thank you.